this siege that is organized by a few states. One is China, and the other is Qatar. And they're organizing an attack on Israel, legitimacy.
Netanyahu is not exactly known for being a truthful speaker anyway. And let's look at what Netanyahu has said, and it actually fits the American narrative right now that China is their enemy. China is nobody's enemy.
The Dutch government is taking control of Chinese-owned semiconductor manufacturer Nexperia.
10,000 people in Holland, which is a very small country, 10,000 people are going to lose their jobs because that company will have to close down. So far, just a day or two later, it's already hurting the automotive industry in Germany and in Holland.
This gigantic structure hangs in midair between two mountains, 625 meters above the river below. China has now officially opened the highest bridge in the world.
There is a restaurant and there is a high-speed elevator, glass elevator, and you can bungee jump off the bottom of that bridge.
As tensions rise between the U.S. and Venezuela, the Pentagon is steadily amassing combat power in the Caribbean, signaling the potential for a much larger and longer-lasting EMP.
We'll see what happens with Venezuela. Venezuela's been very dangerous.
America might build a military base, as they did. A great example was Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. There is no military expansion by China. We still don't know what the two Christophers actually did. UK media is strongly controlled by American influences, and American influences want China to be the enemy. China has never, ever been a threat to the United Kingdom.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Today's guest is Jerry Gray. This is Jerry's second appearance on this channel. So welcome Jerry, how have you been?
Thank you, Ali. I've been good. It's a little warm here, but we're getting towards the end of the year and I'm looking forward to some cooler weather. It's currently, we're late October and it's still 31 degrees here in Zhongshan. But thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's a bit cold over here, which is why I'm wearing my beanie and my jacket.
I was thinking of coming
I feel
on with
cold.
the beanie just in sympathy with you, but it was just too hot.
Plus, I've got my allergies. Yeah, my monthly allergies. So I'm drinking some warm tea.
Cheers.
So, were you on holiday a couple of weeks ago?
No, I travel a lot. Holiday is a relative term. I'm retired from full-time work, so I work I do some freelance journalism, although I never describe myself as a journalist. I travel a lot for myself. The last major trip that I took, and I've taken two major trips this year. One was 19 days through Xinjiang, and that was with two different media groups. I went with one media group as an invitation, as a large group, to go and just have a look around and make my own comments, because I write about Xinjiang. And Xinjiang this year is the 70th anniversary of autonomy. So they have been what's called not a province of China anymore. They are the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. And they've been so since 1955. So this is the 70th year. They're celebrating that. So a lot of people have been invited to Xinjiang this year. So I was there for a 10-day media tour because I do write about Xinjiang. And again, you don't get paid for this. You get invited to places, you learn a lot, and you come away with a different perspective or a better perspective or a changed perspective in some cases, not always better. But in my case, I love Xinjiang. I always enjoy going there. The second part of the trip, so I was there for 19 days. I had 3 days off in the middle. And then I had 4 days working with another group. And that other group was a TV studio who wanted to film a particular aspect of Xinjiang. And I won't say too much because there's a video coming out about it. And I was kind of the host of it. And I again, don't get paid for this. It's something you just do because you want to learn a little bit about this very mysterious land of Xinjiang. And it really is mysterious. I've been there 6 times and I'll probably go there 6 more times in the next few years. I love the place. So I was there for making a video, and then I was there as a media tour. And before that, I did a bike ride from Zhongshan, where I live now, which is very close. If anyone knows the geography of China, I live very, very close to Macau. I'm on the opposite side of the river to Hong Kong, and I live very close to Macau, about 45 kilometers from the border of Zhuhai, the city, and Macau. And I cycled from here to Inner Mongolia, which is quite a long way north. So that's about a 2,800 kilometer bike ride, which took a little less than About 6 weeks, a little less than 6 weeks, 5 weeks.
So you've got a road bike, I'm guessing.
Yeah, just ride a road bike. It's kind of an adapted bike. I changed the wheels, I changed the tires, I changed the structure on the thing a little bit, but basically I've cycled with an off the shelf. I paid 1,800 RMB for a bike in Harbin. Harbin is in the ice city in the northeast of China, and I was there doing some work. This was 2018, and I just went and bought a bike to ride home with. It took 42 days to ride home from Harbin. Just instead of flying home, which would have taken about 4 or 5 hours, maybe 6 hours to get home, it took 42 days. And that was a bike. I walked into a local bike shop and said, I'll have that one, and I want a helmet, and I want some gloves, and I already had my panniers bike stuff. I want a rack put on it. And they did all of that in the shop, and I spent a total of 2,000 RMB. US dollars, that's about 300. Australian dollars, it's about it's less than 500 Australian dollars. So yeah, I just bought a bike and rode home for 42 days, fixing punctures along the way, of course.
$300 for a road bike. That's pretty cheap.
500 Australian dollars.
500, yeah. When I was a student, I just went to Kmart and they had those display bikes, road bikes.
Yeah.
Display bikes which they give out on discount. So I got it for $75. That was like 20 years ago. Yeah, it never broke. Yeah, because I just use it to go to university and back. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Well, imagine if you're in Melbourne going to university. Imagine deciding that today you're going to start a ride up to further north of Brisbane, maybe Mackay. Not quite as far as Mackay, but somewhere north of the Sunshine Coast would be the same sort of distance that I've just done.
That's true. I want to get your take on this clip. I'll show it to you. I hope this works. This is the first time me using this feature on Riverside. So let me get this right. I'll show you the clip, and I'll talk about it. And okay, and let me know if you hear the clip. Okay.
That effort to besiege Israel, not isolated as much as besiege Israel, that is orchestrated by the same forces that supported Iran. Iran's effort to put a military siege on us and ultimately choke us. We were able to break loose from that siege, and we will have to do several things to break loose from this siege that is organized by a few states. One is China, and the other is Qatar. And they are organizing an attack on Israel legitimacy in the social media of the Western world and the United States. We will have to counter it, and we will counter it with our own efforts.
So I will stop the. Okay, did you hear what he was saying?
Yeah, it's the first time I've seen that.
So that came out 3 weeks ago, and I was really surprised. I know Israel is not a superpower yet. It will be a superpower in future once it extracted all the resources from Europe and America, because it's not using its own resources for waging wars at this point. But in future, I can see Israel sort of waging war with China and Russia. But at this stage, when they are still fighting wars within their neighbors, Israel is a very cunning and smart nation. I didn't understand why he would target China so openly. I mean, do you know why he would do that right now?
Who knows? No, I can't say that I know. I have opinions on this, and you'd have to be many people have different opinions, and they would say, well, Jerry's wrong, and I wouldn't argue with them because we have different opinions based on different experiences. So until we know what happens, we can't say that was right or that was wrong. And we can argue all we like, but I would prefer to say let's debate that. And let's look at what Netanyahu has said. And it actually fits the American narrative right now that China is their enemy. China is nobody's enemy. It's as simple as that. China has said time and time and time again, all it wants is a multipolar world of equality, egalitarian. That is what China wants. It's Marxist theory. Everybody in the world should be equal. And China has said this since the founding of the People's Republic. Mao Zedong said it, Deng Xiaoping said it, Hu Jintao, Jiang Zemin. they've all said the same thing. They are looking for nothing more than equality in the world without a hegemonic power. Now, if you have America as a hegemonic power, if you have Russia as a hegemonic power, China would be unhappy with that because it wants equality. So, I mean, let's bookmark and come back to the Russia thing, because this is about the Israeli-China threat. There has never been a tangible threat from China against any country, anywhere, at any time in history, with the exception of, in PRC's history, I should say, with the exception of one rather rash invasion of Vietnam, which was done at the request and with the connivance of Henry Kissinger and the new regime that he was serving in the United States. And it was approved by America that China would go into Vietnam because China was their new friend from 1976. China and America were kind of opening up. So was Australia. Australia opened up to China before America did, and that's something that a lot of people don't know about. But China went into Vietnam, and it did so for a reason. Vietnam was threatening Cambodia. It looked like China was supporting Pol Pot, but they weren't. What they were supporting was regional stability, their own borders. Cambodia and Laos have borders with China. Thailand doesn't. But what China could see happening was the newly strengthened Vietnamese military were going to go into Cambodia. They were going to take down Pol Pot. They were going to then go into Laos. They were going to take over there and probably would have expanded into Thailand. So China went in for 3 weeks, 21 days, I think it was, 19 days, I think. It went into Vietnam. It served a purpose. It distracted the Vietnamese military. They had to come back to protect Hanoi. Then Pol Pot fell a year later. 1980, Pol Pot fell. So China achieved its goals of keeping regional stability by doing this. There was no thought of an occupation. There was a military invasion which lasted less than 3 weeks, and then it was all done. It was over, and China came out. That's the only time in the People's Republic of China's history that they have threatened another country. Now, people would argue, but what about Korea? They went into Korea. Yes, they did, but they were protecting their own borders against American aggression. America and NATO were, and it now transpires quite illegally, using a United Nations approval based on a false flag. America and its NATO allies were illegally in South Korea fighting North Korea, and China defended its own northern border, eastern border against incursion. And I mean, there's no question about it that China was defending itself at that time. It defended itself in Vietnam against American aggression. It defended itself in Korea. It did nothing that threatened any other country and never has done. So for Netanyahu to say that China is threatening to invade, attack, whatever, his words are that China is threatening, I would say, show us the proof. Show us some evidence. Show us where you have that information. And the answer is no one has ever shown any information of that sort. I would say that this is purely part of the narrative that makes China look like the bad guy in the eyes of Western media, Western politicians, the Western narrative that China is being bad. China's not being bad at all. It's being extremely aggressive right now. It's being extremely defensively aggressive, but it has never. China has not attacked. China has not even threatened a single supporter of US sanctions. If there is such a thing, I'm not even sure there is. But if there is any other country supporting US sanctions, including the European Union, China has not made any threats and has not taken any action. And we're not talking economically, we're talking trade, we're talking military. China has made none of these threats to any of those countries. What China has done is said, we will defend ourselves. And it's been saying that since 1949, because it said, we have now finished a century of humiliation. We're not going to let this happen again. China will rise from these ashes. It will be the Phoenix country, if you want to call it that. And it will be strong, and it will be a leader in global peace, which is exactly what it's trying to do now. So all of this rhetoric that China is evil, China is dangerous, China is aggressive, China is expansionist, China is militarily expanding, it's enforcing its doctrine. None of these are true, not one of them. And I would challenge anyone to find me a single piece of evidence from a single leader of China to say that that word or those words from that leader support this person's claim that China is aggressive. The answer is China is not aggressive. So that's how I would view that. Netanyahu is not exactly known for being a truthful speaker anyway. If I may say so, I think the man is a lying POS.
Yeah, but Israel doesn't really require proof to wage wars. We know that. Neither does the US. True. So, so they're not going to provide any proof. The only reason I could think that they would target China now is because China, via BRICS, both China and Russia via BRICS were trying to shore or strengthen Iran's defenses, I guess, because obviously there will be an attack on Iran again. Israel is not going to sit back and let Iran do what Iran wants to do, which is basically progress in that region. So I think Israel wants to be the only superpower in that region. And I think it might become one, maybe in future. Yeah, but I found this statement really strange at this point when Israel is nowhere near as strong as China to start threatening a country like China. So, yeah,
to be honest, neither is America. America is
I know,
near
but
China
America,
now.
they like their chest thumping and internal demagoguery and puffering, so to tell their own people that they are number one. So they've got that ego complex of being number one in every field.
It's not just their ego; it's their entire psyche. It's their manifest destiny. God has chosen them to lead the world, and the Israelis, God has chosen them to live in Israel. Wherever Israel's borders happen to be, that's it. Man decides Israel's borders, and God decides how to get them. I mean, I've made a couple of videos about this. Religion is literally the cause of most of the wars, and let's make no bones about it. The attack on Iran is religious based. The attacks on Gaza, the attacks on Syria, the Golan Heights, all of these are religious based. Jewish people, Zionists, not all Jewish people, Zionists want more territory. More territory comes from this, and they use the excuse of defending. If they were defending their borders, they'd have an incredibly strong wall built around their country, and it would all be peaceful. Now, they're not defending their borders at all. They're not defending anything. They are attacking. They're aggressively attacking. So it's probably going to hurt your YouTube algorithm when you post this. We're saying all the wrong things, but the way I view them, that's the case.
Yeah, Israel's borders keep on changing every year, so you don't really know where Israel starts and where Israel ends.
Even China in the United Nations, China's stated position is that Israel needs to go back to pre-1967 borders, and there should be a two-state solution. Now, given what's happened, I think the two-state solution is completely gone now. I don't think it's going to be possible. But I mean, it would be possible, but would only be possible if Israel. And you say you think Israel will become a superpower. I don't. I personally don't. I actually hope they don't, because they're demonstrably evil. And what I think will happen, is that the United Nations should expel Israel. It should also either at least suspend, probably expel the United States, and they should become pariah countries in the world. That is how I see this ending. Personally, I don't think I've never seen any leadership anywhere call for the expulsion of two countries from the United Nations. But right now, those two countries should be pariah states, but they've got support from others. And of course, the United Nations Security Council would veto any move of that sort. And this is a problem that we have. We've got a rogue country in America. America is, without a shadow of a doubt, a rogue country. It's conducted extrajudicial murders in your country. The Osama bin Laden invasion was an extrajudicial invasion of a sovereign territory of Pakistan to murder someone who had not been found guilty by a court. They call it a war, and it was a war on terror, but it was a self-declared war. It was not a United Nations approved war. Therefore, any action that they took to do that was war crime. or should not have been a war crime. It was an international crime. They've done it. They're doing it right now with Venezuela. They've done it in many other countries as well. Soleimani was another example. They go to another country and they murder people, and that is illegal under international law. Then they say, well, we don't apply that international law. We apply American law. American law says these guys are guilty, but American law doesn't. The Constitution has amendment, the Fifth Amendment, I think it is, where due process is required before you can take judicial action. And judicial action means execution. So you have to say these people haven't had due process. So they're breaking their own laws, they're breaking United Nations charters, they're breaking international laws, and they're doing so with impunity. And Israel are the same. Now, my view is that both of those countries ought to be sanctioned out of the international community.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is all true, 100% true, but nothing's going to happen. Again, Israel is a very smart and very cunning country. And the way they have gone about it for the past 60, 70 years, they've got total control of international bodies. Even though they're war criminals, there are arrest warrants out for Netanyahu. But what happened to that prosecutor of ICJ? He was blacklisted from Microsoft. He couldn't even access his, I think, OneDrive. He couldn't even access his bank for his wages. UK government, complicit with United States, just blacklisted him. He's a Britisher.
The US government does this all the time. They did exactly the same thing 10 years ago to Carrie Lam. Carrie Lam was the chief executive of Hong Kong, and they did exactly that to her. They just basically sanctioned her out of every system that was basically known to man. China has come up with has offset this. China has its own banking system now, and it has changed its system. I don't know if you're aware of this. When they announced the rare earth elements restrictions, they actually picked up a piece of paper and said, here is the form that needs to be filled in, and it's not a Word document. It can't be accessed on Microsoft Word or Apple. It can be accessed through WPS, which is a Chinese alternative. And they've done this now quite deliberately. There is a very good reason why I personally got all of my investments, my money, everything that I had in Australia is now in China. Very good reason, because Australia is a vassal of America. At some stage, America will say, well, this guy's always criticizing us. Let's sanction him. Let's make him an example. So I would literally be living on vapors if I didn't have my pension and my superannuation paid from another country into China. And you take me out of the SWIFT system, my money's gone. Now, they could actually have seized my assets. And there's another thing that America are now doing, and Holland, on America's behalf, are seizing the assets of organizations that have nothing to do with the Chinese government. They're saying China is playing hardball, so we're going to seize this private corporation's assets and re-own it. We're going to make it into a Dutch company when it's actually, it's really going to backfire when they do this, because that company sends, and I'm talking about both dollars and products, billions to China, so that China can test them, reprocess them, package them, and export them. Billions of chips are coming into China from that company. Now, how does that company get all of its equipment that it needs, all of its resources that it needs? From China. So China just now saying, well, okay, we're not going to send you any more resources. You can't have any of our rare earth elements. You can't have any of our products. We're not going to do any testing. And 10,000 people in Holland, which is a very small country, 10,000 people are going to lose their jobs because that company will have to close down. That's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot of people. It's already hurting so far. Just a day or two later, it's already hurting the automotive industry in Germany and in Holland. VW comes from that area. Porsche comes from that area. Audi, Mercedes-Benz, they can't get the parts that they need, the components that they need to make their cars, because America has effectively closed down a Chinese source. That's how they work. The idea of, and the ICJ was no different. Once they take you out of the system, you are a nobody. You cease to exist. And this is why I don't have a cloud. Everything I have is stored on one or two of these at home. Everything. I do back up everything that I have, but there's no cloud. I do have an international email address, which you know and you use. And one day, if that ever disappears, I actually have a Chinese email address too.
Yeah.
I should send that to all of my. They can stop me getting on. I don't have Microsoft Word. I have Microsoft Windows, but I don't have Microsoft Word. I don't use PowerPoint. I don't use Word. I don't use any of the Microsoft things. I use LibreOffice because at some stage they will cut me out, or they can cut me out. Not will, might.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that Nexperia company in Netherlands, that's blatant robbery by the Dutch and America. I mean, it's a subsidiary of a Chinese company. I think it's WingTech. But did Netherlands, are they that dumb enough to not realize that Dutch assets are also in China, and China can seize those assets also in retaliation if China wants?
The difference, Ali, is that China probably won't, because this would be illegal. The World Trade Organization has rules. China is a member, and it applies by those rules. So far, China has made no threats. What it will do, almost certainly, some of the big Dutch companies here, the biggest is probably Unilever. It's a huge chemical company where we get our washing powders and things like that. They're huge here, massive. And there's a couple of others. I believe Lipton's Tea. Lipton's Tea is a Dutch company. And this is a strange thing being in China. And I told my wife this the other day. Lipton's Tea is the largest tea provider in China. Now, most Chinese people drink tea, but when they go out and they buy packets of tea or they buy instant coffee, it's through one of Lipton's products. Now, what China will probably do now is to say, let's check these Dutch corporations for compliance. And that is just going to bureaucratically block everything that they do. It's going to hurt. Now, I don't know that China will do that, but China could do that. So go to Unilever, go to Shell, which is huge here as well. There's I think there's 10,000 Shell service stations in China. So go to Shell and then just check all of their compliance issues. And until they're compliant, 100% compliant, and let's be honest, most corporations are not. They're always doing something that is not 100% compliant. China will say, you need to be compliant on this. And until you are, we're closing you down. And then they can say, well, okay, to get compliance, you need to go to this office. That office will say, yeah, you need this, but you also, before you do this, you need that. They can make it extremely difficult to become compliant. And those companies will eventually say, yeah. And it's not China breaking any laws. It's them. But China can make life very difficult for any Dutch corporation. Now, will they? I don't know, but we'll wait and see. Certainly they can. In my opinion, they should. But China is very different. They view things differently. They have different lenses to us. They say, okay, what's going to be best for China? If we were to close 10,000 Shell service stations, there's probably 20 or 30 people working in each one. So there's a lot of people going to lose their jobs. What do we do? How do we change this? How do we make Shell suffer without making the Chinese people suffer? So there may be different things going on. It's certainly not the way that China operates. They won't go out. And you can bookmark this and come back to it and tell me if I'm right or wrong. But in the next 6 months, I bet we will not see a Dutch corporation seized by China. We haven't seen any other country's assets seized by China anytime, anywhere, because that would be non-compliant with World Trade Organization rules. And China follows the rules. Now, this is why I'm confident that people say to me, yeah, but China's done this. Prove it. Western media says China has done this. Now, where's your proof? I don't mean a headline. I mean proof. Where does the proof come from? It comes from a wording inside of a Western media article that says China might, China could, China may, China is able to. All of these are true. China could, China might. But will China? Does China? And the answer, generally speaking, is no. In fact, not generally, every time. I've been able to prove people wrong thousands of times on this. Okay, you said that, but where's your proof? And they show me an article. I said, no, it says in here that they could, or they might, or they may, or they have the ability to. It doesn't say that they're going to, or they have done so. It says, interpreting what one Chinese government official has said, interpreting as government policy. It's not government policy at all. So what China might do, what China could do, and what China does do are very different things usually.
Yeah, that's true. China has been an adult in the room so far. But yeah, I mean, I consider this thievery, stealing other countries' resources, and there was very little news in the Dutch media. Even if you try to find it on Google or Bing, there's very little in the newspapers in the Dutch media about this. So not many people knew, but now they're coming to know about it because obviously their job losses of 10,000 to 15,000 people. They were dependent on this Nexperia company.
The interesting thing is the reason it's hitting the news now is because China has said, well, in that case, we're not going to be sending rare earth elements to that Chinese corporation, nor are we going to be servicing their needs, because now they're not a Chinese corporation. We're not going to do the job that we've been doing with this Chinese corporation for many years. Now they're saying, look at China being aggressive. Well, what's China done? China has just simply said, well, we no longer own this property, so we're not going to pay the service fees for it. You can do that. That's how it works. So if you want to take over one of China's assets, you take over China's risks and liabilities with it. So the Dutch corporation now has to pay China to do things that China was doing with that corporation. It was part of their business strategy. Now it's not. It's going to become an additional fee. It's going to become a fee for service which China can set. China is quite right to do so. So what are they going to do? Where are they going to get their chips tested? Where are they going to have their chips packaged? Where are they going to get the resources to make their chips? Because China is no longer part of that corporation's business strategy.
Yeah.
That's not China being
that
aggressive.
Tells me, I agree. And that tells me that, I mean, I know Dutch people are not that dumb to act on it rashly and then not realize what the consequences would be, but they were pressured by United States. But again, they could have said no. I mean, surely they would have known the consequences of that happening.
Dutch, it may not be the Dutch facing the Chinese consequences, because when you think about what happened, Philips is a Dutch company as well. They're huge in China. Philips what's it, AMSL, I think it's called, the huge
TSML.
manufacturer of chips. Now, they're all using American technology. What happens with American patented technology when America says, if you don't comply with what we want you to do, we are going to withdraw the rights to use our technology? Now, that puts them in a very difficult position, because the moment they say, no, that would be against World Trade Organization rules, America doesn't care. America will just say, that's not our problem, your problem. You have to comply with what we want you to comply with, or the consequences will be, we'll put you out of business. And they will. They'll put them out of business, and then companies like BlackRock will go in and then fire sale buy them. So they become American corporations. This is how the Americans work. This is their strategy. It's a strategy of denial. We stop you from doing something, and their current Deputy Secretary of Defense wrote the book, Strategy of Denial. They will say, we're not going to give you something that you absolutely need unless you do something that we want. And that thing that we want is going to destroy the business that you have that we can destroy for you. You're rock and a hard place scenario here. There is no choice for the Dutch. It's probably not the Dutch being bad. It's the Dutch will be on the phone to their Chinese counterparts saying, we don't have a choice. How do we get out of this? What can we do? And there is really no way around this without divesting yourselves of the corporation that you're running and changing its entire structure. I know someone who's had to do that here. Divested himself of his corporation, changed the entire business structure, and the business is now operating again. But he has had to effectively retire from a business that he owned. He owned a business, and the U.S. government sanctioned him. I know this has happened. I know this personally. I've got a friend it's happened to. So you have to, and he was lucky in a sense that his business was small. It had less than 300 employees. You're talking about a business with 100,000 employees around the world. It's not easy. And now they don't even have a Chinese CEO to manage that restructure. They have a Dutch CEO. Phew. Yeah, it's pretty tough times.
It is. It is. Anyway, hope it gets resolved soon. Doesn't become like the Huawei case where I think, what was her name, Miss Feng? She got
Wen
arrested in
Mengzhou.
Canada.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Wen
that
Mengzhou
was
was.
really bad. I mean, out of the blue. And there was a lot of so the way they did it was very clever and cunning. They started spreading news, Australian media, American media, British media, that Huawei is installing listening devices or spywares in mobile phones, in the earbuds or everything that they produce. There were huge news articles in the media over here, on the television as well. So they did it very smartly. They spread the propaganda while they were arresting her. So I found it really strange that they would
Yeah,
just do it
the
out of the
fact
blue.
is, it's,
Yeah,
to this day, no one has ever proven there is a backdoor into
correct.
Huawei. No one's ever found that backdoor.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Meng Wanzhou case was slightly different. They were talking about her selling. She created a PowerPoint, and in the PowerPoint there was some information that they were dealing with Iran, and so therefore Huawei was responsible for sanction busting. So it's a little more complicated than that, but that's effectively what caused that arrest. And it was done through HSBC, which is a British banking corporation. Huawei's bank used to be Huawei's bank in Hong Kong, and it was done through them. Apparently they alerted the State Department about Huawei's sanction busting, but probably the State Department came to them and said, look, we want to know everything about this corporation. And they found this tiny, like I say, it's impossible to be 100% compliant. They found this
Correct.
tiny little thing that they said, we've got them, and then found that they didn't have them. It's the same. I mean, if you want to talk about it, the two Christophers, I just made a video about the two Christophers in the
I
UK.
was gonna talk about that.
Exactly
I've
the
got a
same
slide
thing.
on it. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's exactly
I've
the
got a
same
video
thing.
to
They
show you on
found
that.
something that they feel was an offense, an affront, not an offense, an affront to British security. And America found something that was an affront to American security, but there was no actual offense. They didn't create any offense. We still don't know what the two Christophers actually did, but whatever they did was offensive, but not an offense.
Yeah. I'll show you another small clip, and
Move
that's
on
a
to the next.
positive news. But I want to get your take on it as well. I will go.
At the same time, we talked about China earlier. We weren't able to cover this bridge, but there's this new video going out and going massively viral for the right reasons. It's not AI. China has now officially opened the world's tallest bridge. They did it in less than 4 years. The bridge has a restaurant at the top, 2,600 feet above the river. The bridge cuts a 2-hour drive to 2 minutes, features a theme park with a glass skywalk, a high-speed glass elevator, and a waterfall off of the top of the bridge. Visitors can bungee jump off of it.
No,
the Grand Canyon Bridge is 2,050 feet above the river and spans 4,600 feet across. Quote, insane. And you can see
Beautiful.
here, that is...
the waterfall features.
It must be nice to live in a real country. Last time that we were doing stuff like this was when? Hoover Dam? That was over almost 100 years ago.
Meanwhile,
By the way, if you've ever been to Hoover Dam, it's pretty awesome.
People were making the comparison to the bridge that was knocked down by the ship in Baltimore.
Oh, right.
And how long it will take for them. I mean, I think they have started construction, which is actually pretty good for America's standards, but it's going to be years and years before that thing is complete.
Yes.
And that's just, a basic aspect. I mean, look, it's an extraordinary modern marvel, et cetera, but it's also like nothing special in the grand scheme of bridges. And that will take much longer than the 4 years, apparently, that they were able to construct this in. And that's
Is her name really Crystal Ball? Wait, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Yes, her name is Crystal Ball, and she's fabulous. She's a fabulous journalist.
Right.
So there are some news channels on YouTube which get shadow banned, but they show positive news from around the world. And yes, her name is Crystal Ball, and she's great. if you listen to her shows, she's really good.
Must have been having a laugh at that.
Yeah, she talked about how her parents named her. But I want to show you another one that's linked to this positive news, which is this one.
Benefiti izgradnjom pruge, benefiti su razni i možemo ih nabrajati do prilično dugo. Za stanovnike, za kvalitet zemlje, za lakšu gradnju, za sve što je ono običnom čovjeku potrebno, to nam je na dnevnom redu kao benefit.
So yeah, these two clips are obviously the first one was the world's tallest bridge, marvel of engineering and science, and what Crystal said in the end that America is still struggling to build the bridges that have been broken by ships colliding with them, whereas China is building new bridges and building them at a very rapid pace, and not just simple bridges. This is very difficult to build, let alone engineer and design. So they've done it, and then so that's in their own country, and then they're trying to help other countries as well. So this is the second clip was the railway track between Serbia and Hungary, and also the railway that China's built. So that's helping other countries as well, cut time for the travel as well. We don't see America, Australia, Canada, UK doing that in any other country. We have never seen them build anything in any other country except military bases. And I'll show you one more thing, which is very telling. So these are American military bases around the world.
Yep.
Around 900 of them. This is massive. And yeah, so in comparison to that, China only has 6 or 7 military bases around the world.
No,
so
it
America
doesn't.
can build military
China has
bases.
one. China has one.
So America can build military bases around the world, not just on its own continent or around its own neighbors, but it can't build positive social infrastructure for other countries. It's strange, and China is doing that, and it's very hard to get that positive information from mainstream media or corporate media. So I just wanted to get your take on
the only country where China has a military base is Djibouti. And it works in Djibouti. It has a military and a naval base. The port is a naval port. And China has built an aspect of that. America has built part of it as well. So yeah, they're working with 20 different countries to prevent piracy in that region. That is the only place in the world where China has a military base. Now, there are rumors and there are stories and there are Western media reports that China has a listening base in Cuba. Well, prove it, and I'll accept that's possible, but I've never heard of this, and there's no evidence. There's just allegations that this has happened. What has happened is that China has sent telecommunications equipment to Cuba, and of course, telecommunications equipment from China usually means Huawei, and Huawei are listening devices. So there's the connection is a very tenuous connection. There's a rumor that there's an island in the Indian Ocean that China has militarized. It has not. What it's done is it's put a traffic control and weather monitoring equipment in there, and this is purely for civilian use, not military use. They were talking about the military expansions into the South China Sea. China has not militarized a single island anywhere. It has built 2 airstrips out there, and both of them, neither of them, hold military. But they could. They could. And that's another one. Gwadar Port in your own country is another example. The port of Gwadar could be used by Chinese military. Could, but isn't. So if they are the 6 that you're talking about, 5 of them are, well, 3 of them are just not true at all. 2 of them are spurious claims that have never been proven. And one of them is a military base where they're working under the auspices of the United Nations with 20 other countries. 21 countries are working out of Djibouti. Now, Djibouti is a strange one because they didn't just build a military base. They have built schools, they have built hospitals, they have built train lines, they've built roads, and America has still got a military base in Djibouti. So that's what China has done, is expanded out of the military base with civilian infrastructure. Then you get people coming along and saying, well, look, China is doing this just to make friends. Oh, yes. Wouldn't it be better to build you a hospital and become your friends than build you a military encampment and become your oppressors, which is what America has been doing? Now, they say, oh, we're protecting their assets. No, they're not. They're protecting their own interests, their own assets. They're not protecting Djibouti's assets at all. And neither is China. China is there to protect Chinese shipping through the Horn of Africa where it was in danger. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes about that. China is quite clear. We're there to protect Chinese assets. It's the only place in the world where China has sent military to protect Chinese assets. But they're not just protecting China's, they're protecting the world's assets. Now, that's the difference. America are in 800 bases around the world in 150 countries, I think, but none of them are there to protect that country's or global assets. They are there to protect American national interests or national security. So they're there to protect America's interests. They're not there to protect China's. So that's the difference. Military expansion is very, very different in China. There was an African leader not that long ago made a great point about this. He said, every time, I mean, there's a couple of these. One of them is the point where he said, every time the West come here, we got Bibles and lost land. And every time China comes here, we get infrastructure. And someone says, yeah, but at what cost? And here comes the lecture, the lecture that was given to us. We get lectures and we get Bibles and we get land stolen. And so that was one thing. But there was another one that said, every time China builds an infrastructure, it doesn't matter what happens in the relationship between us and China. The infrastructure's still there. They build a hospital. They don't take it away when they leave. The hospital remains. America might build a military base, as they did. A great example was Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. This is 30, 40 years ago. They had massive military infrastructure in the Philippines. Mount Pinatubo blew up. A day later, all of America abandoned the Philippines. And the Philippines was left to clean up all of this stuff. And honestly, they should then have said, America will never, ever set foot in our country again. But of course, they've now got the Marcos back. It's a different story. So we can go into that. Military expansion is very differently done by China than it is. There is no military expansion by China. It is simply expansion through soft power, diplomacy, through aid and helping. China doesn't put any conditions. China never sends USAID, which is full of rice and AK-47s. What it does is it sends rice. It sends food when it's needed, when it's humanitarian needs, and then it sends infrastructure when there are developmental needs. So there's a difference between humanitarian needs and developmental needs. USAID is sending humanitarian aid along with military aid to protect their own interests. China sends humanitarian aid, and then when it wants to help build a relationship with a country, it says, well, do you need a sports stadium, an opera house? Do you need a hospital? And they're built, they're donated. And Jason Smith has written the book about it. I think we mentioned him last time. So there's a whole book about what China has done in these countries. And it's none of them are militarily or security for their national interests. The only place that China sends military is in blue caps under the auspices of the United Nations peacekeepers. China is the largest contributor to United Nations peacekeeping forces in the world by a long, long way, which is appropriate because they have the biggest army by a long, long way, pretty much the biggest army. Let's go back to your bridges. The first, Crystal Ball's comment, the bridges. At the same time as that Baltimore bridge crashed, a ship crashed into the Baltimore bridge in Guanjo, where I live just 80 kilometers from Guanjo. Around about the same time, within days, there was a very similar incident where a boat crashed into a bridge and the bridge collapsed. More than 1 year ago, back in May or June last year, I was on the restructured bridge. I was on it making a video with Guangdong Television, and that video is actually in my Jerry's Take on China feed. The bridge was rebuilt within 18 months. But within 1 week of the bridge being built, the military had put a temporary bridge. Within 1 week of the bridge collapsing, the military had put a temporary bridge there. Now, there were people who died in that bridge collapse. It was sad. But there were also some heroes. There was a truck driver, and I've met him. There was a truck driver who drove his truck up, saw the car in front disappear down, or the bus, I think it was, disappear down, and he backed his truck, and then he blocked the road so no one else could pass. And then he got out of his truck because, of course, in China, as soon as there's a roadblock, motorbikes get up on the footpath and go past it.
Yeah.
And he got out of his truck, and his son, no. So he and another motorbike rider stopped everyone from going over there. And he was rewarded with an award which allowed him, and I've met him and I've met his parents as well, because we're making a video about how the National People's Congress develops things. And I met this guy and the motorbike rider, and they were rewarded. The motorbike rider got 20,000 RMB and immediately donated it to the local school. That's the kind of person he was. The truck driver got a large sum of money, and I don't know how much, but he was heavily in debt paying off this truck that he'd bought, and was an owner-operator of a what do you call them, an articulated truck, Pantechnicon. But yeah, he had this truck, and it was a container truck, and he was on his way to a container port to pick something up and deliver it. And he lost 3 days, 4 days work as a result of this. And he was in debt because he's paying off this truck. And he was able to buy his own truck for cash. So his life is now set. He's married. He's got a kid. I met his wife. I met his parents. They're very proud of him, obviously. And he's a young guy. I mean, he's probably 25 years old, maybe not 30 yet. And he's now a self-made man because of his actions and because of what China did. They rebuilt that bridge, completely rebuilt that bridge, and it's now usable. I've been on it, I've walked across it, and I've driven across it both ways. So not me personally driving, I have been driven across it. So that bridge was rebuilt in the space of 18 months, but within a week of the accident, people were getting on and off because it was an island. It had no other way off. And it's a farming island. So everybody on there was farming vegetables and taking them across to the local markets. So all of them needed to get to market, or they would have all suffered. So that's how China responded to that. Now, the Baltimore Bridge is still not built, and it looks like several years before that happens. Going on to the other thing, that bridge does not have a waterfall. The waterfall that you saw coming off the side was a test. It was a water shedding test. They filled up I think they filled up trucks, loads and loads of trucks, and then they put the trucks on, and then they emptied all the water off at the same time. And it was a weight stress water shedding test that they were doing before they opened it. So the waterfall is not there all the time. It's not real. But there is a restaurant, and there is a high-speed elevator, glass elevator, and you can bungee jump off the bottom of that bridge. There's another thing that they've just opened, which is a free fall jump. And this terrifies me. I don't like heights anyway, but this terrifies me. But they have now tested a free fall jump where you jump into, it's not a trampoline, because if it was, you'd just sort of bounce off and fall to your death. It's a net that catches you and goes, like the net that the trapeze artist would use in the circus. And it catches you and it drops you right down, and then it brings you up a little slower so you don't go flying over the top. And they tested it with balls, big balls that see how many of these flew over the top with a bag, the weight of a human being dropped on it. So it's been tested, and it's now opening up as a fun activity. I don't know. It's not my idea of fun, but there you go. And it's not the first. I just around the corner from us here, we have the Shenzhong link. That's the Shenzhen-Zhongshan link. That's the road that runs across from Shenzhen to Zhongshan. It's 60 kilometers long. There's another one just 40 kilometers from here, which goes from Hong Kong Airport through Hong Kong into Macau and then into Zhuhai, the mainland. And it means from Hong Kong airport to my front door is less than an hour. It's really, really fast. So that kind of thing is what China is doing. I remember years and years ago at school when I was teaching, some of my kids said they're going to build a bridge from Hong Kong to here. And I laughed. I said, that's not going to happen. And I went at the lunchtime, I went back to the staff room and I pulled out a map of Guangdong and I showed them how long this bridge has to be. I think it's almost 70 kilometers long and it's across the opening of the Pearl River Delta. And there are now 2 of them and they're building a 3rd. So yeah, I was wrong. My students were right. China is constantly defying the odds in terms of its bridge building. And we keep getting talked about, you get the people who criticize China talking about the tofu construction. They're building these bridges and high-speed trains are rattling across them and slow-speed trains are rattling across some of them. These are huge infrastructure projects and there hasn't been a train accident in many, many years.
Yeah, and there's no high-speed rail in America. So, there you go. You can't really compare the infrastructure.
Let's go back to the Serbian one, because that's an interesting thing. Politically, this is an interesting thing. Hungary is part of the European Union, and Hungary is on the outer of the European Union. The European Union are talking about expelling Hungary from the European Union because they don't like the fact that Viktor Orbán, the leader of Hungary, has been elected, I think 3 times now, and each time on a bigger majority. So socialism has taken over this country that is part of the European Union, and so Viktor Orbán is supportive of Russia. He supports the non-NATO proliferation, non-NATO expansion, what Russia supports. He's not supporting Russia's invasion into Ukraine, and neither do I, to be quite honest, but that's a different story. I do support Russia's actions, but not the actions of marching into a sovereign country. That's another story. But Viktor Orbán is definitely on the outer with the European Union and, of course, the United States. And Vučić, I'm not sure how to pronounce that in Serbia. Serbia has been waiting 15 years to get into the European Union. 15 years. Now, these 2 countries, Serbia and Hungary, are very close to China. So that's not going to be very good for the European Union. What is happening there is we're seeing a balkanization, if I can use that word, of the European Union. They are eventually going to kick out Serbia. And these 2 countries, Serbia and Hungary, would be much better dealing with the Eurasian Economic Union rather than the European Union because they are more like-minded. They're more like-minded with the Eastern Europeans rather than the Western Europeans. So I would suggest that probably we're going to see Hungary and Serbia break away from the European Union and form an alliance with the Eurasian Economic Union, which very recently, less than a year ago, made Iran a free trade partner of the Eurasian Economic Union. So you can see how this kind of fracturing is happening now in Eastern Europe rather than in Western Europe. Western Europe seems to be quite cohesively pro-American, at least the European Commission is. I'm not sure about the European Union, the Parliament and the people, but the European Commission is very pro-American, anti-Russian, anti-China, and the people I'm not so certain about. I think they would like to see more cooperation. Certainly the European Parliament seems to be less Americanized.
No, that's true. I talked to Jason Smith yesterday. I'll put the conversation today on YouTube on my channel. But he was also talking about the same things, that America builds military bases, whereas China builds hospitals, schools, and infrastructure that help society. And we see it go into Africa, build railway tracks, bridges that can cut time for travel between 2 different cities so that trade can take place. So it basically helps the local economy as well. Obviously, there's an inherent interest of protecting Chinese investment as well over there. But it's a good thing. You're not expanding your military bases. You're growing through trade. So
Mm.
why can't America do it? I don't really understand. Mainly because in their nature, they don't like to help. They just want to extract and grow in that way. I mean,
America has
maybe the
a
imperialist
history of
mindset. Yeah.
exploitation. It's exploitation. America's
Yeah.
history,
Yeah.
excuse me, since its formation, America's history is exploitation. I have water. Yes, and that's what they're doing. They've done it through South America. They're doing it in Latin America. They're doing it in Africa. They're doing it. They're exploiting Europe as well. They're not going to change them. When the Second World War ended, Britain was in massive debt to the United States. Massive debt.
Yeah.
The Lend-Lease program. And they begged and they pleaded and they sent everybody across to negotiate to try and get better terms. And America just said, no, we're not going to give you better terms. America destroyed Britain deliberately, and Britain accepted it. They took it on the chin, stiff upper lip and all that, and they basically said, well, we have a debt and we have to pay it. We'll repay this debt. And they did. And it took most of my life before they paid it off. It was in the 2000s. I was born in 58 and Britain was still paying off the debt. I think it was 2006. It might have been 2007. They paid off the final installment of the Second World War debt. America exploited Europe. It exploited Britain. And then when it chose to do so, America pretty much funded the destruction of the European Union with Brexit. America is doing the same thing with Serbia, with Kosovo. The reason Serbia is not allowed into the European Union is because they haven't resolved the issue of Kosovo, which is an American-created issue. Again, another story, but there's lots of stories about what America are doing, and it's all based around exploitation. They were founded on exploitation. True. They were founded on genocide. They were founded on slavery, and they simply have not changed from that.
Yeah, it's very difficult to change the nature of a country when you don't really have a civilization. Because America, I mean, how long its history? 200, 300 years? Yeah, so you can't really do much about it. Yeah, so, I mean, but they're lucky. They've got the country or the continent they're on has got everything. So they're lucky in that way. But how long it's going to last? Not that long. And because... So they're expanding their own military budget. So as an example, as an engineer, $1 trillion US, that's the expansion, $1 to $2 trillion expansion of the American military budget. If they put $1 trillion to good use to build houses, roads, schools in America, it's going to build around 1 to 1.5 million houses, complete with ancillary structures such as roads, parks, schools. It's going to benefit their own society, but America doesn't really care about its own citizen. That's what we feel from the outside. It cares about showing its own strength and might. So I think their priorities are very different to China's priority, where I think China, from the outside, it appears that it wants to help its own people. Obviously, it wants to grow stronger, so no one can colonize it again, but it wants to genuinely helps its own people as well, which is why the economic structure is working really well in China. Whereas in America, because of hard capitalism, everything goes up. The more money you have at the top, the more money you're going to get in future as well. Financial markets are there to extract resources from their own economy, to not benefit their own people as well. So I think that's a stark difference between how both countries think. So there was a scandal with Shein. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that word right. Shein company, where it invited social media people from America, I think, or from other countries as well. And then there was a backlash that Shein uses child labor or slave labor. But then nothing came out of it. There were big headlines, but no one followed up on it. So you've got. I want to know what your take on it is.
There is no child labor. There is no slave labor. It's actually illegal in China. Illegal to work until you're 18. You have to be at school. It is illegal to have a job before your 18th birthday. Now, you can leave school at 16. You have a minimum of 10 years in the cities, 9 years in the countryside, in the rural areas. But if you leave school, you can't do anything. You are not legally allowed to work. Now, if you're in the rural areas and your parents are farmers or shopkeepers or drivers, then yeah, you can work in your family, and it's not official. You don't get the social security and stuff like that. But I've seen kids of 16, 17 working in shops here, but it's a family-owned shop. So you do get that kind of thing. But there is no such thing as slave labor, forced labor, child labor. It simply does not exist. Now, every single corporation that has come to China has been through these checks and the balances that the Chinese government has. It is impossible to operate any form of company without the bureaucracy knowing who you are and what you're doing. Now, yeah, you could start an illegal business and you could employ anyone you want, but you'll get caught. It's as simple as that. You will get caught. You could not be doing this on an industrial scale. It would not be possible. So China's laws, China's industrial relation laws, are extremely strong. And if you want, after we've finished, I can link you to China's industrial relation laws. And I can assure you, I've been into, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of different factories for various different reasons. I've worked as a business consultant for a while. I used to go visit lots of factories and write reports for international organizations saying, can you go look at this factory and tell us about their capabilities, their capacity, and their compliance as well. And I have been in factories that are less compliant than others. And I've been in factories that are incredibly compliant. I worked in a company that had a factory for 3 years as a training manager. And I would literally, rather than go to the canteen, I would eat my dinner off the floor of the factory. It was that compliant. It was just so clean. But it was a CNC manufacturing, additive and subtractive manufacturing. So 3D printing and CNCing and things like that, plastic injection, all going on in the same place. And I would say I've never seen a cleaner factory. That's the kind of thing that China has now. We're seeing all the time images of Chinese factories. They're dark, they're automated. China is not using slave labor. If it was using slave labor, it wouldn't have a youth unemployment problem, which it does. And it acknowledges that and is working towards fixing it. I would say every single accusation that you see pointed at China is actually an admission that somebody else is doing this. They could do that because we do. That's the way that this goes. Shein is not. I would stake my entire contents of my bank account to say that Shein has no systemic labor abuses. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a bad boss in a factory that does something evil. Yeah, of course there's going to be people like that. But I'm talking about a corporation that has a policy of labor abuses. I would guarantee and I would bet my entire bank account on the fact that Shein does not have that in its system. What it might have is one or two bad bosses, one or two people. Now, I also know, because I've been a teacher for a long time, I know of students who lie about their age to get a job. So is that child labor? This is a kid who's left school at 16 and is now saying to the boss of a factory or the HR department of a factory, I'm 18, here's my ID. And it's either a fake ID or it's a brother or sister's ID. And they get a job. They're only 16. That's child labor in China. It's illegal. If it happens and the factory gets caught doing it deliberately, then the factory would be in trouble. If the factory double checks and says, no, you're not 16, you're not 18, you're only 16, then the factory will be praised for doing that work. But factories do get into trouble for employing people illegally. Yes, it happens. But I would guarantee, 100% guarantee, there is no systemic abuses in any major corporation anywhere. And I'm also talking about the Uyghurs, the forced labor, the genocide. There's none of that. There is absolutely none of that. Now, I'm not saying that there hasn't been a Uyghur arrested, wrongly arrested. There was a massive crackdown on violence and terrorism. Of course, some people got caught up in that, but they would have been arrested, interviewed, released. No one's in prison who doesn't deserve to be in prison unless there is a miscarriage of justice. It's not a systemic problem. It might be, as it happens everywhere. There might be a corrupt cop who's done something wrong. There might be a corrupt business leader who does something wrong. But it is not part of China's system. It is not part of China's policy. It is actually the opposite. It's the antithesis of China's policy. China's policy is that you can't work till you're 18. When you do work, you can't work more than 40 hours a week. If you work more than 40 hours a week, it can't be more than 48, and you get paid overtime for the 8 hours a week. It's all very well documented, and it is very well policed by the Chinese government. So I would disagree with that, wholeheartedly disagree with it. I would absolutely say that in every single story I've seen about China's malpractices, it is never proven. It is only ever alleged.
Yeah, there wasn't much pushback from Shein or from any of those social media personalities that they just sort of succumbed to the pressure and said, yeah, we shouldn't have gone to Chinese factories. So
well, it's
again,
extremely
maybe they
hard to prove a negative. Now, I've been to Xinjiang. This is the Xinjiang Uyghur genocide narrative is one of the biggest allegations against China. There has never been a single person named who has been genocided. Not one person. There's not a book or a list of victims. There isn't. There are no refugee camps on the borders of Xinjiang anywhere. This is something that is simply not happening. Now, I've been to Xinjiang and I've cycled across the entire region. I've cycled from the east to the west, and I've cycled from the west to the east on a different route. I have seen 5,000 kilometers of Xinjiang on the ground. I've also been on bus journeys around Xinjiang and train journeys, and I've flown in Xinjiang. I can assure every one of your viewers that there is not a single case of any kind of oppression against any Muslim, any Uyghur, any Kazakh, any Tajik, any Kyrgyz. This is a region that is managed autonomously by those people who are supposedly being oppressed. Now, then I put that onto X or in Twitter when I first started, and people say to me, but you can't have seen everything. And that's true. I can't have seen everything. It's impossible for me to see everything. This is a country that's the size of Spain and Germany combined. It's a big place. I can't have seen everything. That is right. What I did see, though, was ordinary people doing ordinary things, and you can't hide that from me. You can't hide when I ride through a village that has only 50 houses, that the people there are welcoming, they're enjoying our company, they're wow, you're a foreigner, where do you come from, what are you doing here, why are you here in our village, and you're the first foreigner I've ever seen. We get these conversations all the time. Now, if a region is being oppressed, genocided, or have any kinds of suppression on it, those people would be closing their doors as we went through. They would be backing away from us. They'd sell us stuff if we tried to buy stuff in their local shops, but they would not interact with us in a friendly manner. Psychology 101 tells me there is no oppression. My own eyes, my own experience of riding 5,000 kilometers tells me there is no oppression. So how do I prove that? When they're alleging that there is, I can't possibly prove. And this is the same with Shein. They have thousands and thousands of factories, and because they're a massive corporation, and they do have thousands of suppliers. Some of them are very small factories, some of them are very large. You can't possibly go to all of them and check the HR records of all of them, and then checking the HR records, which could be falsified, go and talk to the factory workers. It is impossible to prove or disprove this allegation. What I can say is there cannot possibly legally be in China an environment of coercion inside of factories. It is impossible under Chinese industrial relations laws, which are very, very strong and very strongly policed, particularly for foreign companies. Foreign companies get visited all the time. Any leader, if you can find some foreign business leaders and talk to them, they will tell you the same thing. Oh, we must comply. We have no choice but to comply. China's regulatory bodies are very strong. They are very compliant, and every company in China does its best to comply. Now, there's always going to be bureaucratic nightmares in China because it's a bureaucracy. I'll give you an example. I had a coffee shop once, and we used to sell beer. In the evenings, people would come and have a beer in our coffee shop. We got visited by the alcohol registration or regulation body. They said, "You don't have a license." We said, "Yes, we do. Look, there it is." "No, that's a license to clear up after alcohol. That's a different license. You need to come to our office." And we were fined 10,000 RMB for not having the proper license to sell. But we did have the license to the sanitation license for alcohol. So it was one department not telling us you need to have this one as well.
Yeah.
One department said you have all the, you've complied with all of the cleanup regulations, but you haven't complied with the selling regulations. Mistake on our part. We paid the penalty. It was 10,000 RMB penalty for our business. We don't have that business anymore. It was a long, long time, more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We had this coffee shop, and beer was the only thing we made money on. So we had to stop selling beer until this had been resolved. It took a couple of weeks. My wife, who was the nominal business owner, had to go to the government office. She had to pay the fine. And then we were allowed to sell beer. We got a license to sell beer. So it was all done. Compliance is really, really strong, but you will always find someone who hasn't complied because of some tiny little administrative error. That was our problem, is administrative error on our part. We thought we had the right license. We didn't. We got caught, paid the penalty. That's normal in China.
Okay. I'll show you one last clip. This
Okay.
is the tale of two Chris's.
That's my clip.
The trial of Cash and Berry had been due to start at Woolwich Crown Court in London last Monday, but suddenly, in mid-September, the case collapsed. That was after the CPS said they were unable to proceed with the charges. Now, that was despite, according to the Times, security services and senior police officers being confident the case was a, quote, slam dunk. So why was it dropped? The truth is we don't really know. It's unclear. Some details are coming out. The director of the Crown Prosecution Service, Steve Parkinson, though, has pointed the finger at Keir Starmer's government. He said that because the government repeatedly failed to label China a threat to national security in witness statements provided to the prosecution, the case would have failed. And that's because charges against the two men stipulate that the country getting the intelligence must be an enemy. So the Crown Prosecution Service couldn't establish China was an enemy or a threat or whatever word they needed. And so the case collapsed. Kemi Badenoch struggling politically, but she saw an opportunity here to go on the attack.
Two men have been accused of spying on MPs in this very building. The CPS had what it felt was a clear and compelling case to prosecute. But the trial has collapsed because for months and months, the government has been refusing to give the CPS vital information. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This looks like a deliberate decision to collapse the case and curry favor with the regime in China.
Curry favor with the regime in China. How dare he? Keir Starmer in response.
So, why does UK want China to be the enemy, I guess?
Well, UK doesn't. UK media does. UK media is strongly controlled by American influences, and American influences want China to be the enemy. UK does not. UK needs China very, very badly. That's the first time I've seen that. I made my own video on the two Christophers, and the wording, "we don't know," was my exact wording. We don't know. Now, what actually happened? Now, Keir Starmer is a former Crown Prosecuting Solicitor, so he's a former CPS. He knows the law. Now, let's get this straight. Keir Starmer understands the law. Like him or loathe him, he understands the law. You don't get to be the Crown Prosecuting Solicitor without knowing what you're talking about. This is the most senior. This is the Attorney General of the US. This is the most senior solicitor in the country. So Keir Starmer knows what he's talking about. Keir Starmer has said, it wasn't us. These offences happened under the previous government. You need to get the previous government to say that this was a threat. This is the problem that Keir Starmer has, because you cannot retrospectively go back and say, oh, we think they were a threat then, but they weren't, because they were never nominated as a threat. China has never, ever been a threat to the United Kingdom in any way, shape, or form. It never has. Now, many, many government officials have come out and said China is a challenge. China has got problems with Hong Kong democracy. That's a particularly big one in the UK because they feel kind of responsible for that. It's a load of BS, to be honest, but I can get that the UK says Hong Kong is a challenge for them. Tibet There's another challenge that the UK created back in 1917-18. They created a line called the McMahon Line, which meant that India and China are still arguing today over who controls different parts of Tibet. So they really literally created the Tibetan problem. China is a threat with the Xinjiang Uyghurs, which we know is total BS. And the other one is Taiwan. China is just about to invade Taiwan, which also we know is total BS because China has never threatened Taiwan with anything at all, ever. What it says is if you move away from us, if you try and separate from us, we'll defend Taiwan. We'll defend Taiwan from being taken away. That's a very different interpretation on the threat of the Taiwan invasion. Taiwan is, according to the United Nations, an integral part of China. Now, you could argue all you like, whether it's the KMT, whether it's the PRC, the CPC, CCP, whatever you want to call it. You could argue all you like about that, but you cannot argue that Taiwan is part of China. And China would rightly defend its sovereign territory. The United Nations recognize it, the United States recognize it, the United Kingdom recognizes it. So if you look at it from a Chinese perspective, you try taking away Tasmania from Australia. What's going to happen? Australia will defend it. Try taking Alaska away. If Russia decided now this is a great example, we want Alaska back. Russia says Alaska was leased. America says Alaska was bought. Because of the Russian Revolution, Russia can't find the paperwork. America says, no, that paperwork doesn't exist. It probably does, and it's in an archive somewhere, and they know exactly what the situation is. And if it was true that they had bought it, they'd pull the piece of paper out and say, there you go, there's the paper. So I think Russia probably has a claim for this. So if Russia came along and said, we're going to take Alaska back, what would America do? Exactly the same as China will do if America comes along and says, we're going to make Taiwan an independent country. Or we're going to make it the 51st state of the United States. They could do that if they wanted. But I think Australia would get that first. So, or Canada, or Iceland, I don't know. So maybe the 54th state of America could be Taiwan. Who knows? But the fact is, China is not going to allow that. So there's those 4 threats. All 4 of those threats are at best spurious allegations that have no real grounding in truth. So China, if we take away those 4 threats, China has absolutely no threat or even a challenge to the United Kingdom if we were to take away those 4 threats. Now, one of these guys, Cash, I think it was, one of them's a teacher. I don't know how a teacher got into Parliament and was had access to the kind of secret that he could have got into trouble for. The other one was a parliamentary researcher. Now, the parliamentary researcher may very well have had access to secrets, but if there is a problem that he was sharing them with someone, that's not a Chinese problem. That's a British intelligence security problem. That's MI5 failing. That's an MI5 failing. That's what the problem is there. It's not a China problem. It's a UK problem. Now, when they say that China was not a threat, Boris Johnson never said China was a threat. Liz Truss didn't have time. She was only, she had this, what they call the shelf life of a lettuce as the prime minister. And then Rishi Sunak came in with absolutely no mandate to govern the country. And so you had, well, he didn't. Only 187 people voted. Now, this is not, he won by 187 votes. Only 187 people voted and he won. So he had no mandate to be the leader of and he'd already been rejected once. So effectively, you had a leaderless country making allegations that China was a challenge, but without saying and coming out and saying China is a threat to us. China has threatened us. And Keir Starmer is not at fault here. He's quite rightly said, we need to look at this retrospectively. At the time these offenses were committed, China was not an adversary. It was a challenge. The government said so several times. But you have to get that government to say that China was threatening. And unless you have that evidence, then the Official Secrets Act, which is what they were charged under, had absolutely no clause, no ability to convict them, because in that word, the word enemy. And there was a case at the same time they were being arrested, there was a case going through the court which collapsed because there's a group of Bulgarians spying for Russia, apparently, And that case collapsed because the Bulgarians were spying for Russia, and Russia was not defined as an enemy. There was no danger of Russia attacking the United Kingdom 1 or 2 years ago when this was coming to light. So they said Russia is not an enemy. The Official Secrets Act doesn't apply here. Now, because the Official Secrets Act doesn't apply, they have now instigated a new law. The Official Secrets Act, which was 100 years old, has been repealed, and a new law has come in, which is called the National Security Act. Now, if you think about this is exactly what they're angry about China for doing in Hong Kong. They've created a national security law. Oh my God, exactly what they're saying China is wrong for doing, they have already just done themselves. So there's that to be considered. But the fact is now they could be charged. But you cannot retrospectively go back and say they did something wrong when they didn't do anything wrong against the law at that time. So that's Sir Keir Starmer's problem. He cannot get a conviction on the basis of a previous act, an act that happened under a different law. So there's that problem. So the new National Security Act does provide to charge these people. And if they were arrested now, they could be charged. But there's one thing that really, really confuses me, and that is the Foreign Agent Influence Act. It is against the law to be an agent of foreign influence. So what does that mean? Let's, for example, use my own personal experience here. I've been told by a very highly recognized, well-acknowledged international lawyer, do not go to USA, UK, or Australia for the time being, because you are an agent of foreign influence. What that means is I've written an article that the Global Times has published. And because the Global Times published it, and I'm a freelance journalist, they've paid me for writing that article. So that means I have broken the law in those 3 countries, not because I wrote the article, that's not breaking the law. When you are an agent of influence of a foreign country, you must register that agency. So I have not been able to register in the UK. I wouldn't register in the USA because I'll never go there anyway. But I can't register in the UK where I have a UK passport, and I can't register in Australia because in both cases you need to be there to register. You need to go in and register and sign the registry, and I can't. Now, I can't set foot in those countries because I'm an unregistered agent of foreign influence. Why can't that law be used? If these 2 guys got paid any money by China, then they may not be spies, but they could certainly be agents of influence. Now, if they don't have evidence for that, then surely these guys are not spies. Why did they provide information? Now, nobody knows what they actually did. There's a lot of stories, but one of the stories is they were acting. One of the guys was acting as a waiter at a party. Now, this is just a story. I don't know if this is true. And someone from China said, I'm from the Chinese delegate. Do you know what rooms the Taiwanese people are staying in this hotel? And he said, yeah, they're in rooms 33 and 34 and 35, whatever the room number was. That is the extent of it. He was acting as a waiter, and he gave information to the Chinese people that he probably would have given information to anyway if someone from another country had asked, do you know where the Taiwanese delegation are? Oh, yeah, they're in that room. Now, if that's the extent of it, and this may be why we're not being told. Why aren't we being told? It may be so farcical that it just makes a mockery of the legislative process. If that's true, and I don't know that it is. Let's be honest. I don't know what they actually did. But you've got one of them's a researcher. He's 33 years old. One of them's a 30-year-old teacher. And they are both being accused of giving away top secret information to China. I don't know. Maybe they did just say, oh, yeah, you'll find them in room 12. That's it. That's the top secret information. That's all I know. And it's pure speculation as well.
Yeah, no, I found it really strange. Not this espionage case. I found it really strange that they so desperately want China to be a threat and they want China to be an enemy. Again, I can never understand why people want to wage wars and fights. There are other ways to grow. Friendship is one that comes to mind because everybody
Friendship
benefits.
Would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
The UK desperately needs friends. There's no question about that.
Correct.
If we go back to 2015, only 10 years ago, David Cameron and Xi Jinping were drinking beer together saying the golden age has arrived. The golden age is here. What happened between then? Because China hasn't changed at all. Xi Jinping was still the leader then. It's the same person. They were smiling and laughing and having a beer together. Xi Jinping doesn't drink beer at all. I mean, he was kind of kissing the glass. But that's it. Xi Jinping had his taste of English beer and probably went, "Ooh, give me a Mau Tai any day." I don't even know if he drinks. I've never seen or heard of that, but I've seen him cheers with a glass, but I've never seen him have a drink. So Xi Jinping, David Cameron had a beer together. The golden age had arrived. That was 2015. That's only 10 years. China has not changed in any way, shape, or form. The UK has come out of Brexit. David Cameron lost his seat and a Tory party came in. And then we had all kinds of problems with Boris Johnson. We had COVID, which a lot of people want to blame China for. But if you go through all the history of COVID, there is no question China discovered COVID. There's no question about that. China discovered it. China isolated it. China did everything that it could to prevent it from spreading by locking down cities inside of China and locking down regions. I was locked down to an extent for a short period of time while they worked out what to do about this thing. And then they let us loose and we were able to travel. I traveled to Thailand and back. I traveled to 41 different cities. All of these different things that people tell us about me being locked down, very, very different. The reality was very, very different. And that's another one that we could talk about in another show. But COVID is possibly the only thing that the Johnson government can say China became a threat to us. If there was evidence that China did, in fact, put COVID into the world. Now, there's no evidence that that happened. If anything, there's certainly allegations that America did, but there's no evidence that they did either. And I'm staying out of that argument. All I do is I say, it'll come out eventually. I don't say Fort Detrick. I don't say Wuhan Institute of Virology. I don't say anything. All I know is I trust China, and I've trusted them for the last 10 or 12 years. Before that, I don't think I did trust them as much, but I do now. I've seen corruption disappear. I've seen the skies get cleaner. I've seen the environment get nicer. I've seen compliance improve. I've seen all the different things. I've seen the reduction in bureaucracy, which is better than it used to be, but it's still a big bureaucratic country. All the things I see are positive. So I don't see China in a negative light very much at all. There's not much negative that I can see. Bureaucracy is still one of the negative things, particularly in banking and hospitals. But these are minor inconveniences compared to what's going on in the world. And China is not a threat to anybody. Never has been. It's still not a threat to America. America is threatened. America has acted. China has retaliated. China has responded. And China has elevated and escalated the situation. There's no question about that. But they've done so in self-defense.
Yes, and again, it's in the nature of America to fight and be number one. So in future, if America doesn't collapse on its own, it is going to wage war against China or Russia.
I don't think
eventually.
so. I would disagree with you there. I think America will attempt a war with China, but it will be a proxy war, not an American war. America wanted a war with Russia, but it didn't want its own war. It wanted proxies in there. It would still very much like the European Union to get involved, but not NATO, because NATO brings it in. But it wants the European Union. It wants countries that are in the European Union to get involved in this war, physically involved. It wants the UK involved in it, and it will supply all the necessary moral and military support, but it won't get involved itself. The same thing will happen here in China and in Asia. But before it does that, it's going to get bogged down in Venezuela, almost certainly, because Venezuela are not going to go to roll over. Venezuela, I think, and I hope it doesn't happen. I hope we don't. I hope I don't have to come on and justify this statement, but I think Venezuela will be yet another Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, something they get embroiled in that they can't get out of. It will be a nightmare for America, and it's actually America doing it. They'll need their war with Iran first, because once they take Venezuela, Venezuelan crude oil cannot be used without mixing with a light sweet crude, which is what Iran has. So Venezuela and Iran are both important to America for very different reasons. And it's got nothing to do with ideology. It's got nothing to do with Islam. It's got nothing to do with women's rights. It's got nothing to do with drug cartels. It's because Venezuela has a really heavy crude oil and Iran has a light sweet crude oil. When they mix together, they're a perfect blend. So that is why America wants those two countries. It wants their resources. It's got nothing to do with drugs, Islam, women's rights.
That's true.
It's got nothing to do.
Yeah, that's very true. An empire does what it wants to do and comes up with excuses later, you know. So
well,
that's
it's
what it
created
is.
the excuse. America's problem is drugs. America's internal problem, its biggest internal problem, its second biggest internal problem is drugs. Its first biggest is domestic violence. When I say domestic violence, I don't mean men beating their wives. I mean the internally domestic, as in the United States of America has a violent extremism problem. And that problem is along all kinds of different lines, but mostly, according to the FBI, I don't make this up, the FBI have reported this, it's Republican voters who own most of the guns, and those people who own most of the guns have many guns themselves. So I actually know people here in China who own 17 or 20 guns. I had a friend here who had 17 firearms, and he said, I've got 20,000 rounds of ammunition for each one of them. So why the hell do you need that? In case my government I'm going to rise up against my government if I need to. If you don't trust your government that much, then you really do have an internal problem. And that is their internal problem, domestic extremism. Domestic extremism is Republicans. And it's not along religious lines. It's not along any kind of ideology line. It's effectively the haves against the have-nots in America. So they have their own big problem. I can't see them winning in Venezuela. I can't see them getting away with it in Venezuela. And until they do that, they can't take Iran. And I can't see them winning in Iran. And until they take Iran, they can't challenge China. So I don't see there's a very near future for America and China to have a war. There are too many ifs along the way. I'm not saying it isn't in their plans. I'm certain it's in their plans, but I don't think it will happen. And I don't think America will go to war with China. Because the moment they do, then they will literally lose thousands, if not tens or even hundreds of thousands of young American soldiers, sailors, and airmen who are currently floating around in Asia and will be targets of immediate hypersonic strikes. The moment America sets foot on a war footing with China, then they're going to lose what they've moved. They don't bring aircraft carriers in to the three-island chain. They move them out. The nearest an aircraft carrier will come to China is Japan, and they assume that China has the ability to take those aircraft carriers out. Take an aircraft carrier out, take out Pine Gap. China has already won that war in the Pacific. It doesn't mean the war will be over. I mean, China has already dominated the Pacific. Pine Gap in Australia is probably the big one. The one or two aircraft carriers that happen to be floating around here, hit with carrier killers that are hypersonic, or drone swarms that are not affected by EMPs. They've actually got drones that are not affected by EMPs.
That's true. There was a paper that came out of Council on Foreign Relations in America, 2015. So, and that set the tone on why and how America should curb or control China. So it was called Revising U.S. Grand Strategy Towards China. So that since 2015, you would see Obama shifting focus slightly away from Middle East towards China. And that paper was sort of, the stepping stone of that.
Yeah.
So I found, again, they have their own, Washington has their own policymakers, and they set the tone depending on what they perceive as a threat. Middle East.
The problem is, Ali, they won't listen to people who know. Now, I could go to Washington. I could go to Washington and I could tell them how wrong they are about China, but they won't listen to me. They have no interest in listening to me because I would show them where their weaknesses are in any argument that they have. Now, I'm not a military trained specialist. I'm just an observer of China, and I understand Chinese psychology a little bit better than the ordinary guy in the street. That doesn't make me an expert at all. But what I can do is I can say that is not how China would react when you do this. And I've been right so far in almost every step that America has taken. China has retaliated in a way that I've expected them to retaliate. And I'm often on my YouTube channel, I'm often giving predictions of what I think China will do. And invariably, this is right. They do what I think they're going to do. This is how it works. So far, I mean, there's been 2 or 3 predictions in this video with you and I, and let's see how right I am, and let's see how wrong they are. We won't know until the future. But if we were to come back to this and say, well, they didn't do this when they said they were going to do this, and they did do this when China said they were going to do this, and China didn't do what they said they were going to do. All the things that they say China will do are usually an indicator of what they would do if they were in the same position. And I see China very differently to them. So I would love someone from the United Kingdom to contact me and say, look, we know that you have a contrarian view on China to our narrative, but here, if we give you this paper, pull it apart and tell us what you think about it. And I would do that for them. I'd do it for free. If the British government comes to me and say, can you help us to analyze what China might do under a set of certain circumstances? I'd say, yeah, I'd be happy to help you. I want to see Britain do well. I want to see Australia do well. I don't care at all, a jot, about the United States. I don't want to see American people suffer the way that I think they are about to suffer, but I do want America to be pulled into line. And until America are pulled into line, we are not going to have global peace, global stability. It's that serious. And so I do want to help. I'd help the Australian government. I would help the British government at the drop of a hat if they were to ask me. They're not asking me. They don't care. They don't want my opinion.
Because they view every other country through their own lens. So that's the thing. And their lens is a product of their own mentality, of their own psyche. They've got intellectuals like Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Noam Chomsky, John Mearsheimer. They've got all those intellectuals that they can use to not wage wars, but to make friends and grow trade together. But they're not going to do it because that's not what Washington is all about. It's all about chest thumping and saying, okay, we are number one. We can do this. There's one last clip. I just forgot about it.
Okay.
And this is very telling when it comes to Chinese intellectuals. I've never seen any other intellectual challenge. Okay.
This kind of a propaganda have too many. No one believe it. Too many what? Too many. Too much. No one believe it. Except a few Israelis.
We really do all what we can not to hurt the citizens.
To kill more than 70,000 civilians.
No,
there are more than the terrorists.
It's not fact, right?
Okay.
Really?
The fact is not decided by you. The facts is decided by the international community. It's not decided by your government. Your government have no legitimacy and the right to deciding or defend what is fact.
So that was a very telling conversation between a Chinese intellect and IDF general. I've never seen anyone else so eloquently in less than 30 seconds summarize what IDF has done and to their face.
What he says is quite
this
correct.
tells me that China is not really afraid of IDF or Israel. But again, we don't see it over here. We see Israeli, American, UK perspective over here. You have to really go find these kind of clips on
There
internet.
are a lot of people, pro-Palestinian people, quite understandably angry with China because China is not taking one side or the other. However, China has taken one side. I've made a video and I've written articles about this. China has taken a side. China has taken the side of the United Nations. China wants to see a two-state solution going back to the 1967 borders. That's its stated position, and it has been since 1967. That's as simple as that. Ever since the two-state solution was first proposed, China has been on top of that, and that is what they want. Now, China does not sell weapons of war into war zones. That's something a lot of people don't know about this. China is not selling military equipment to Russia, and it's not selling dual-use equipment to Russia unless it's sold on a proper basis of, so for example, industrial drones or agricultural drones can be adapted. Now, China will sell agricultural drones to both Ukraine and Russia because they are agricultural drones. Now, they have a dual-use purpose, a slight modification, and suddenly, instead of dropping fertilizer, they're dropping mortar bombs. So, yeah, that's a thing that China does. And it does so because there are no restrictions on those things. There are no legal restrictions. America can sell the same drones to the same countries. There are no legal restrictions. Now, China has created a legal restriction with rare earth elements and said, we're not selling these to Russia. We're not selling them to Ukraine. We're not selling them to Israel. These are things that if they have a military use, you're not getting, full stop. If they have a dual use, then you need to demonstrate to us what the use is going to be, and we will sell them to you. Then you need to demonstrate that you made those things and we'll sell you more for future use. So there is a compliance issue there. And now it's not always going to be easy to check this. Those countries can make things that are dual use and use them for the military purpose or use them for their industrial or agricultural purpose. So this is an issue that China has compliance issues with. But China is now saying, and it has done all the way through, we do not sell into a war zone anything that can be used for that war deliberately. So dual use has to be, people will buy agricultural drones and then convert or modify them. But China is selling an agricultural drone.
Yeah.
So China is not selling a military drone to Russia or to Ukraine, but it will sell. It's dealing with Israel, it's dealing with Palestine, it's dealing with Ukraine, it's dealing with Russia, and it's doing so because it does not interfere in internal politics of another country. Now, agree with it or disagree with it. Personally, I disagree. I wish they would do what that guy did in the United Nations there and really get stuck into Israel. I wish they would, but it's not their policy. And I respect that they don't, because the moment they do, that wasn't an official government policy. That was an individual who is angry about Israel, who happens to be an international relations scholar. He's an academic. I can't remember his name, but he was well received here in China in social media. A lot of Chinese people gave him a thumbs up. Chinese people do believe what he said, but the Chinese government is deliberately refraining from that kind of bluster because at some stage in the future, Israel and Palestine have to sit around a table. Gaza and the Golan Heights and all of these things, they have to be negotiated. You can't, the alternative to negotiation is complete annihilation. And that's the genocide.
I think that will happen. My take is that
it
once
looks like it's
Israel...
happening, but is there going to come a time when these parties sit around the table and say, this is how this is going to end? And when that time comes, China has the ability to deal with both parties because they haven't taken one of those sides. And that is the way China views it. We can argue all we like that China should stop Israel doing this, but China has already stopped Israel from buying anything militarily useful, and it stopped Palestine from buying anything militarily useful, and it stopped Ukraine and Russia from buying militarily useful goods. But it will sell stuff that can be modified because they're selling agricultural or industrial goods. And what the country does with them is up to that country, not China. It's not China's fault that an industrial application drone is being used on the battlefield. And they are equally being used by Ukraine as they are against Russia. So to accuse Russia of doing this, to accuse China of helping Russia is exactly the same as accusing China of helping Ukraine and China of helping Palestine, which is what they are doing. So in that respect, I totally respect and understand what China is doing, but I do wish they'd do something different. That's a personal thing.
But that intellectual was, I mean, the way he said, truth is not decided by you, it's decided by the international community.
Well, the
That was
international
very
community has
telling.
already
Yeah.
said, the
Yeah.
international community, the International Court of Justice,
Yeah.
the International Law, Criminal Court, the ICC and the ICJ have both said there is
Yeah.
a plausible genocide going on. Now, that's an
Yeah.
indication that there is evidence internationally and globally available that there is. So what he said is absolutely right. Absolutely
Yeah.
right. But China
Yeah.
as a government would not say this to them.
Yeah.
That man as an individual. Now, he may have very well have come back to China and been told, don't do that again. It destroys our credibility as a government. Now, he may very well have been warned not to do that again, but he won't be criticized and he won't be punished publicly for that. For sure, he would not be punished at all, but he won't be criticized publicly for it because China actually does feel it. And when people start doing this and stepping out of the Chinese government narrative, they are not criticized for doing so. They're actually in China, social media-wise, they are praised. The Chinese government is going to step back and say, okay, he did the right thing by the people of China. It didn't help our cause when it comes to negotiating a settlement for this conflict that's going on. And that's the way China looks at things. We want to help bring this to an end. That's what China has been trying to do diplomatically through the United Nations. It is willing, it has said so several times, is willing to send peacekeepers into the area. But the United Nations has to say, let's send peacekeepers. But the United Nations won't send peacekeepers into a war zone. It is a war zone. And they won't send peacekeepers in there now.
They get killed.
Until
I mean, they've killed so many United Nations. Yeah.
Well,
They've
United
killed so many
Nations at the
United
moment
Nations
is
peacekeepers in the kitchens and all that kind of stuff. So United Nations is afraid to send their own people now.
Well,
I mean, they've been targeted
understandably,
killings.
the United
Yeah.
Nations are afraid to send their own people because
Yeah.
they're dying in droves.
Yeah,
And this is
exactly.
something that I feel the United Nations really needs to take a stronger stance on, much stronger stance than they're currently taking.
Yeah.
They really need to. They need to come out and they need to say the United Nations as a whole needs to say this has to stop. And the United Nations isn't saying that yet. And I think that's possibly a sad reflection on the very existence of the United Nations. If they're there to stop future wars, which is what they were set up for, they've failed miserably too many times.
I talked to Dr. Ivana Hughes. I'm not sure whether you know her. She's a president of New Age for Peace. She's also a scientist and a doctor at Columbia University. She's done a lot of research on nuclear testing and after effects of nuclear weapons in Marshall Islands as well.
Yeah.
So she was saying that nuclear deterrent is a myth. There have been many more wars after the nuclear weapon has been developed. So nuclear weapons are not going to deter any new wars. Actually, it's a ticking time bomb, really.
What they have done is they've deterred wars against nuclear powers, between nuclear powers. The only conflict between
Pakistan,
nuclear
India,
powers is that, yes. They're the only one.
Yeah.
And fortunately, that didn't escalate. And again, China was involved in negotiating that. Donald Trump was involved in negotiating. I don't know about that. But anyway, he stopped another war.
I think Pakistan wanted peace, which is why I don't really understand. India is part of BRICS, but India is doing military exercises with Philippines and USA in Philippines.
Yeah.
I know why the military exercises are happening. It's not to, there's only one country that United Nations wants Philippines to fight, and that's China. Why would India do that while being in SCO and while being a key member of BRICS? I mean, can you trust India, Indian government? I mean, this is
BRICS
really
is about
weird.
trade. It's not about military. That's the problem. BRICS is all about trade. So the members of BRICS, all of them are independently operating outside of BRICS in their own military alliances. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is about sharing information about terrorism, anti-terrorism, security, but it's not a defense treaty. Russia and Iran have a defense treaty. India has no defense treaty that it needs to concern itself with and can absolutely operate. And China will never be angry with India for doing this. Neither will Russia. China and Russia have their own military alliances. outside of, but China has never signed a defense treaty with any other country in the world. There's no mutual defense treaty that China has ever signed. It has security arrangements with some countries. It has defense applications with some countries, but it has no defense treaty, which means that, attack on one is an attack on the other. Now, Pakistan has just signed one with Saudi Arabia, and the rest of the world are looking at that and going, wow, that's interesting. Now, Saudi Arabia is protected by a nuclear state. This is really interesting, I think, but that's another story for later because we're running out of time here. I think the way that the Western media portray India's place in BRICS is wrong. They keep saying India is not a player in BRICS. India is the joker in the pack type of thing. India is not. India is operating exactly the same way as every other country in BRICS is operating, but the Western media and Western governments will highlight India's differences and portray them as challenges to BRICS. They're not. India was the country that said there will be no BRICS currency. Yeah, but so did Brazil, so did China, so did Russia. There has never, ever been a plan for a BRICS currency, like a euro. There's never been a plan for that. BRICS have got their own internal mechanisms for converting and transferring money, but they've never, ever said, we think we might go down the track of a BRICS currency. And India came out and said that. And then all of a sudden, everyone in the media around the world said, India is offside with the rest of BRICS. They weren't. They were actually confirming what BRICS had said. We're not going to have a BRICS currency. We're going to have transfer mechanisms inside of BRICS. We're going to have country-to-country exchanges in their own currencies. We're going to have a digital currency. But it was not going to be BRICS. It's never going to be BRICS. It never has been. So when you look at what the Western media are reporting about India, they are trying to create the rift that they allege exists. But China, Russia, Brazil, South Africa, they don't care what India does militarily. They're part of BRICS, and BRICS is operating. There's no issues about that. There never has been. And all we're getting is alleged issues between India and Russia, India and China, India and Brazil. There isn't. There are none. There are no problems between those countries. There are just simply each country does its own thing in its own way, but is a member of BRICS and can work within the trade regulations of BRICS. That's what BRICS is all about. It's got nothing at all to do with military. And so whatever India does militarily doesn't affect BRICS. What about if China goes down to the Solomon Islands where they have a security pact and starts to operate with the Solomon Islands, and it won't be military, be their police? Well, would India be upset by that? Because India has a big presence in the Solomon Islands. No, India would just say, well, that's their right to do so. It's perfectly entitled to do so. But Western media will say China is offending India. India will say, not really. But you don't get to see the Indian perspective of it. You only get to see the perspective they would like you to see.
Yeah, in Solomon Islands, it's Australia that's getting angry.
Yes, it is.
about China's involvement. So there was news over here in the media as well. So yeah, but yeah. No, thanks very much, Jerry. I've taken too much of your time again. It doesn't really. I mean, time just flies while talking to you, so I don't really. Yeah, I should probably keep a watch over here to see how much time has passed. I guess. Yes, yeah. Thanks very much, Jerry. Thank you. Yeah, almost 2 hours now. Yeah.
Thank you, Ali, once again. And I think that one day I'm going to be one of these people who looks back in time, in a few years' time, and says, I was one of his early guests when you're really famous. I think you ask all the right questions.
I'm not going to be famous.
Yeah, I think you will be.
Yeah. I just try to do it when I have time. Yeah. But I want to talk to people who actually have, lived experience plus a unique perspective, and that can back everything up with facts and data.
Yeah, I don't think
as an engineer scientist, that's what I look for.
Right. I don't think I'm unique. I do think that it's in terms of the Western media narrative, I'm quite lonely, but I'm not unique. There's a lot of us, but yeah, I'm one of the few that's out there telling it as I see it. Whether it's as it is or not, I don't know. Time will tell. But yeah, I don't see China as a threat. I see lots of other threats around the world, but it isn't China. So anyway, thank you very much for your time and allowing me to come on
Always
and
a pleasure.
piece.
Always a pleasure. There are too many topics I want to discuss, but I'll request you to come back again. Yeah,
Okay,
I've got a
sure.
list over here, but as you can see, yeah, maybe later.